The entire courtroom mock a man, laugh at his blood-stained collar, turn him into a TikTok joke, only to discover he was the one person who could end all their careers with a single word. This is the true story of Marcus Hayes, the FBI director who sat in silence while a broken system exposed itself. And what happened next changed America forever. Stay until the end, because the twist in this story will leave you speechless. The district court opened its doors on a Monday morning that felt like any other. The air inside was thick and damp, carrying the familiar scent of old paper, stale coffee, and something else, something harder to name. Maybe it was routine. Maybe it was indifference. The kind that settles into a place where the same dramas play out over and over until nobody really sees them anymore. Half the seats were filled with the usual faces. Court staff shuffling papers. A few interns trying to look important. A group from the local police department sitting together like they owned the place. Everything was quiet, mundane, just another minor trial in a system that had seen thousands before. Then the left door swung open. Two security officers stepped through first, their faces hard and serious, like they were escorting a serial killer. Between them walked a black man. He wasn't handcuffed, but the way they flanked him, so close, so tense, made it seem like he might explode at any second. His white shirt was wrinkled and stained. On the collar, a dark spot of dried blood caught the light. It looked like he'd been left out in the cold for hours, maybe days. His face told no story that anyone in that room could read. No anger, no fear, no pleading in his eyes. Just a strange, unsettling calm. Like stone, like steel. He didn't look at anyone as they walked him to the defendant's seat. Didn't acknowledge the woman in the front row, who sighed with pity. Didn't react when someone coughed to fill the uncomfortable silence. He just sat down, back perfectly straight, eyes fixed on the empty judge's bench ahead. And that's when people started to notice something strange. Nobody knew his name. There was no lawyer sitting beside him. No family member waiting in the hallway. No one at all. It was like he existed in a vacuum. A man with no identity, no connection to anything or anyone. The court clerk frowned as she looked at his file. No address. No guarantor. No job listed. No criminal record. She muttered something under her breath, but nobody could hear what. A few minutes later, the judge walked in. Middle-aged, white, with a slightly red face and stiff movements, like he'd been sitting at his desk too long. He glanced at the paper in front of him, then looked up at the defendant, then back at the paper. He flipped through the file slowly, twirling a pen in his hand, then tapped the microphone. The trial begins. Silence. Complete silence. And then, cutting through it like a bell, a child's voice rang out. "Is he a bad guy, Mom?" Everyone turned. A little boy, maybe 5 years old with curly hair and wide, innocent eyes, was pointing directly at the defendant. His mother's face went red. She pulled her son close and bowed her head, but it was too late. Someone in the back, a young officer, chuckled. Then another burst out laughing. If you look at that face and don't see a problem, one of them said loud enough for everyone to hear, "I need an eye exam." Laughter spread through the courtroom like a virus. At first just a few chuckles, then more, then open laughter. People nodded. Some patted their thighs. Others exchanged looks like they'd just found their entertainment for morning. And through it all, the man, let's call him Marcus, didn't move, didn't blink, didn't show even the slightest trace of embarrassment or anger. His eyes stayed cold and steady like a frozen lake. And somehow, that made everything worse. That made the laughter grow louder. Because when someone doesn't react, when they don't defend themselves or shrink away, it makes people uncomfortable. And when people are uncomfortable, they often get crueler. The judge cleared his throat, trying to restore order. Defendant's name? No answer. The clerk leaned in. No name in the file, Your Honor. The judge frowned. You have no legal representation? Marcus nodded slowly. Self-representation. Another nod. Do you wish to make Any statements before the charges are read? Marcus looked up. For the first time, he met the judge's eyes. He didn't say a word, just held that gaze for exactly 3 seconds. It was enough to make the judge lean back slightly in his chair, like he was trying to avoid something invisible. Something was wrong. Everyone could feel it, but nobody wanted to name it. Instead, the mockery continued. An officer in the back leaned toward his friend. Did this guy just crawl out of a prison camp? He shoved a chair toward the defendant like he was tossing away trash. Maybe he thinks he's the star of some action movie. Looked in the mirror this morning and saw Denzel Washington. The room erupted again. It didn't feel like a courtroom anymore. It felt like the back lot of a factory, mass-producing prejudice, dialing up arrogance to max. Someone pulled out their phone and started playing body cam footage from Marcus's arrest. The video was shaky, the audio crackling. It showed him being thrown to the ground at night, arms raised as ordered. But the officer's voice kept shouting, "He's resisting. He's resisting." Then the screen went black. "Tech guys say that part's corrupted," the officer said with a grin. "Perfect timing, right?" A young court clerk laughed. "Yeah, well, corrupted is just the new word for edited." He stepped out briefly, then came back with his phone, already cued to another clip, this one recorded that very morning. It showed Marcus entering the courtroom, the light catching on that dried blood stain like a stroke of fate. Add this laughing filter, the clerk said, editing in real time. Slap on some TikTok music, boom, viral. He chuckled while typing. Title it, "This Morning's Black Show." Nailed it. More laughter. Louder this time. Some younger attendees stood up to get a better view. A secretary giggled so hard she covered her mouth, tears rolling down her cheeks. In the corner, an older officer sat with his arms crossed, watching it all. When a colleague tapped his shoulder and asked, "What? You feeling sorry for him?" he just shrugged, just wondering how long he can take it. But here's the thing nobody understood. Marcus wasn't taking anything. He wasn't enduring. He wasn't suffering in silence, waiting for mercy or justice or vindication. He was watching. His silence wasn't surrender. It was like a thick pane of glass, reflecting every word, every laugh, every peeling layer of moral skin from the faces surrounding him. A mirror in which none could escape the image of themselves, mocking another human being while unknowingly exposing their own nakedness to the truth. But not one person in that room was sharp enough to see it. Not yet. Minutes later, the judge instructed the tech booth to play the official body cam footage on the large screen. The lights dimmed. The footage rolled. Same scene. Marcus emerging from a dark alley, hands raised in compliance. Then the shout, resisting, obstructing. A blow to his back. Then black. The screen froze. A small line of text appeared. Error 418. Frame corrupted. The whole room laughed like it had been choreographed. "Criminals can hack body cams now," someone whispered. He didn't have to hack it, the officer near the screen said loudly. The system did it for him. And they roared with laughter again. This wasn't a trial. It was a performance. A pantomime of fake authority, staged by people terrified of one thing, the silence of someone who refuses to beg. Then, without warning, the courtroom door opened again. A woman stepped inside. She wore a plain gray blouse, a modest skirt, and worn beige flats. Nothing about her screamed importance. But the way she walked, silent, steady, unhurried, was like the ticking of a countdown clock. She walked straight to Marcus. Didn't veer left toward the police. Didn't approach the judge. Just walked directly to the man everyone had been laughing at. In her hand was a white envelope. No seal. No markings. A security officer stepped forward to block her. She paused, reached into her pocket, and pulled out a small card. She raised it just to his eye level. 3 words in italics on a deep blue background. Federal liaison. No one said a word. No one checked her credentials. She just walked forward, placed the envelope directly in front of Marcus, then turned and walked straight back out the door. Marcus looked at the envelope for a moment. He wasn't in a hurry. He opened it slowly and pulled out a small piece of folded paper. On it, in black ink, was a single handwritten line. He stared at those words like a witness to the first flame of a new century. His lips tightened. His gaze shifted, not in color but in depth, from patient to alert. An officer nearby caught a glimpse and scoffed. Let him daydream. These guys love the theatrics, spy movie scraps of paper, and all that. But his colleague said nothing, because in his own mind, only one question circled: who authorized her to enter? Marcus folded the note carefully, tucked it back into the envelope, and set it neatly on the table. Then he returned to his previous posture, back straight, eyes forward, silent, as if the woman had never appeared. But for those who had truly seen, the surface of the water had just been touched. The waves hadn't shown yet, but the stone had already sunk. The mockery continues. The laughter grows. But something has shifted. Something nobody in that courtroom understands yet. In Chapter 2, the truth will shatter everything they thought they knew, and the man they called a clown will reveal a name that will haunt them forever. The murmurs in the courtroom had barely settled when something changed on the computer screen in the tech room. A technician, young and confident, was trying to pull up Marcus's file, just routine background information that should have taken seconds to access. But the screen flickered. The text changed color, green to amber, then bright red. A short beep sounded, not loud, but solid, like a lock snapping shut from the inside. The technician froze, staring at the screen as it went black, then refreshed with a single line of text, cold as winter ice. Your account has been locked due to unauthorized access to Red Priority Data Sector. She hadn't even finished typing. Her hand was still on the mouse, but her fingers started to tremble like a low current was pulsing beneath her skin. A coworker passing by saw her face and stopped. "What's wrong? Did you crack the FBI files or something?" But when he looked at the screen, his smile died. There, in full uppercase letters, was a message visible only to high-level personnel. Do not touch. Red priority. No permissions. No duplicates. Nobody asked why, but everyone knew. Anything labeled red priority was something even the system itself didn't dare joke with. Back in the courtroom, the judge was trying to regain control. His voice was slower than usual, like he was carefully shaping each word before releasing it into the air. "Can you state your previous occupation?" A long silence followed, not because Marcus hesitated, but because every syllable he was about to speak seemed to carry weight beyond measure. Finally, Marcus lifted his head. He looked straight ahead without flinching. Former federal investigation work. 4 words. That's all he said. But those 4 words landed like a crack spreading across the worn-out wall of the courtroom. A young police officer let out a dry, involuntary laugh. "If you're FBI, then I'm the Pope." His laugh was brittle like scorched paper. A few scattered chuckles followed, but they were weak now. Nervous, because something in the air had shifted. That answer, those 4 simple words, was still echoing in the minds of those sharp enough to understand. Something was very, very wrong. In the tech room, the female technician made another attempt to access the file, this time using higher-level credentials. The screen flickered again, then displayed a warning sound, followed by a chilling notice. Classified data. Security code G44. The gray-haired man standing behind her stepped forward slowly. He stared at the screen for a long moment, then muttered under his breath, "Why would there be a G44 code on a civilian file?" Nobody answered. Nobody was allowed to. In the world of classified documentation, G44 wasn't a security tier for local officials or common criminals. It was the clearance level reserved for files that shouldn't exist or that existed only because the nation needed to forget something too large to retain. Back in the courtroom, the tension was building. You could feel it in the way people shifted in their seats, in the way the laughter had died down to uncomfortable silence, in the way even the most arrogant officers were now sitting a little straighter, watching Marcus a little more carefully. The judge looked down at his notes, then back at Marcus. "Do you have anything to present before?" But before he could finish, something happened that nobody expected. The far door of the courtroom opened. No knock, no announcement, no name called. The state chief of police walked in. He wasn't in uniform. He wore a charcoal gray suit with a high collar. Behind him came two men in black suits, close-cropped hair, wearing sunglasses indoors, as if the human light in the room was too harsh for eyes trained to scan in the dark. None of them spoke. Their presence was the declaration itself. Something was now moving beyond the administrative scope of this courtroom. The judge stood up instantly. He didn't offer greetings, didn't invite them to sit, just nodded slightly but urgently. The police chief walked slowly to the center of the courtroom. Nobody dared utter a word. The law students who had been giggling earlier now sat like statues. One officer started to approach for an explanation, but the moment he caught the eyes of the man on the right, he froze mid-step. When they reached Marcus's bench, they stopped directly behind him. Nobody touched his shoulder. Nobody whispered in his ear. But one of the two men pulled out a thin object from inside his jacket. It wasn't clear whether it was a badge, a summons, or a token. He held it in his hand for 3 seconds, just long enough to require no confirmation. The officer who had laughed the loudest earlier took a step back. "What the hell is going on?" Nobody answered, and that was the scariest part. The room fell into a silence so thick that even the sound of someone swallowing rang out like a warning shot. Then Marcus moved. Slowly, deliberately. He reached down beneath his feet and opened a black briefcase. His movements were unhurried, precise. No one reacted at first, not out of respect, but out of confusion. He pulled out a gleaming piece of metal, silver-rimmed with a dark blue background and an eagle insignia. Undeniably authentic. An official FBI badge. The room stopped breathing. This wasn't a fake ID from some corner shop. This wasn't a prop from a movie set. This was real, government-issued, unmistakable. And beneath the eagle, engraved in clean letters, was a name. Marcus Hayes, Director, Federal Bureau of Investigation. The silence that followed wasn't just quiet. It was the sound of a world collapsing, of reality being rewritten, of every cruel word, every mocking laugh, every dismissive gesture suddenly becoming evidence in a trial that had just flipped upside down. A plainclothed agent sitting in the back row, someone nobody had noticed before, suddenly stood. He didn't speak. He just bowed. A deep, deliberate bow, as if before a 3-star general in the middle of a battlefield. Another agent followed. Then another. The officers who had been cracking jokes minutes earlier now stood frozen, their faces drained of color. The young clerk who had made the TikTok video looked like he was about to be sick. The law student who had called Marcus a clown was staring at the badge like it was a loaded gun pointed directly at his future. Because they all understood now. In one terrible, crushing moment, they understood. The man they had mocked, humiliated, and laughed at wasn't a criminal, wasn't a nobody, wasn't some random black man they could dismiss without consequence. He was the director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the man at the very top of the system they served, the man who could authorize an investigation into their entire department with a single phone call. And they had treated him like garbage. Marcus still didn't stand. He simply looked around the room slowly, surveying each face with that same cold, steady gaze. No anger, no triumph, no satisfaction, just an empty, ruthless quiet. Then he spoke, just one sentence, 7 words that cut through the air like a blade. "You should have stayed as silent as I did." It wasn't a grand statement. wasn't a call for justice or a declaration of truth. It was just a simple observation, but it cut straight into the core of guilt in everyone present. Because everyone understood now, his silence hadn't been weakness. It had been strategy. He had waited, patiently, deliberately, to see exactly how this system would expose itself when facing someone they deemed beneath them. Someone they thought had no power, no voice, no one to defend them. And they had shown him everything. Every crude joke, every mocking video, every contemptuous glance, every moment of casual cruelty had been a confession. They had judged themselves, convicted themselves. All Marcus had done was sit there and watch. Someone dropped a pen. The sound echoed like a gunshot. A woman in the front row tried to pull out her phone to record what was happening, but her hand was shaking so badly she couldn't press the button. The judge slumped over his bench, lips dry and cracked, muttering as if in a trance. "No way! No way!" An officer who had shoved Marcus earlier now stood frozen, sweat trailing down his neck, legs wobbling like he'd just woken from a nightmare. Because they all knew what was coming next. This wasn't over. This wasn't just embarrassment or shame. This was evidence. Recorded. Documented. Undeniable. Every action, every mocking word they had spoken was now part of a file. A report. An investigation that would follow them for the rest of their careers, and maybe the rest of their lives. And Marcus? He said nothing more. Didn't need to. He just sat there, posture unchanged, not yelling, not defending himself. Because he had already won. Not by fighting, not by arguing, but by being exactly who he was and letting them reveal exactly who they were. The courtroom doors remained open, but nobody walked out, because they understood now. It wasn't Marcus who had been on trial. It was them. The man they had laughed at, the man they had dismissed, the man they had treated like he was nothing. He had just shattered the illusion of their power with a single piece of metal and 7 quiet words. And somewhere, in a data center dozens of miles away, systems were already being activated. Files were being opened. Recordings were being reviewed. The purge had begun. The laughter has died. The truth has been revealed. But Marcus Hayes isn't finished. In Chapter 3, the real consequences will unfold, and an entire system will learn what it means to be reflected in the mirror of their own cruelty. The news broke like a thunderclap across America. By the next morning, every major newspaper in the country carried the same headline, printed in bold black letters that seemed to burn through the crisp white pages. The dirtiest trial of the year. And the victim was the FBI director. No explanation needed. No additional description required. The headline alone was enough to turn every administrative meeting room in the country silent as a morgue. Within hours, the story had spread everywhere. Television news, radio, social media, international outlets. Everyone was talking about the trial where a black man was mocked, humiliated, and laughed at, only to reveal himself as one of the most powerful law enforcement officials in the United States. But Marcus Hayes didn't appear on any of those programs, didn't give interviews, didn't make statements, didn't write blog posts or tweets. He simply disappeared, back into the shadows where he'd always operated. And somehow, his absence made everything heavier, as if each minute he didn't appear added another ton of weight onto the shoulders of those who had disrespected him. The consequences came swiftly, and they came silently. On Monday morning at the Central City Police Department, 3 high-ranking officials didn't show up for the weekly briefing. No absence email, no internal announcement. Just familiar names, people who had orchestrated the mockery, who had laughed the loudest, suddenly gone. Their desks remained untouched, coffee cups still warm, but their personnel files vanished from the system. When the HR officer tried to access them, a chilling red message appeared. Access revoked. Tiered security clearance required. These were the ones who had sneered at Marcus sitting in the back row, who had patted each other on the back and joked, "Where the hell did that guy crawl out from?" Now they were gone. Not fired, not transferred, just erased, as if they had never existed. By afternoon, more disappearances followed. The officer who had played the TikTok video, the clerk who had edited the mocking footage, the young lawyer who had called Marcus a display case. One by one, they vanished from the system. No disciplinary hearings. No official announcements. No reasons given. Just empty chairs and deleted profiles. People whispered in the hallways, afraid to speak too loudly. "It's not that Marcus isn't responding," someone said. "He's erasing every ink stain on the map with a formless eraser." But the real earthquake came 3 days later when an investigative journalist named Sarah Chin published a leak that changed everything. The document she uncovered was titled Ethical Compliance Live Experiment /filed by M. Hayes. The timestamp showed it had been submitted 3 years earlier. 3 years. Marcus hadn't been wrongly accused. He hadn't been a victim of circumstance. He had planned this, orchestrated it, written the script, and waited patiently for the system to perform exactly as he predicted. The document outlined everything. Objective. Monitor and assess levels of ethical deviation within local law enforcement agencies under non-intervention conditions. And in bold at the bottom, requirement. Do not disclose authorship until the system fully reflects upon itself. That courtroom hadn't been a miscarriage of justice. It had been a test, a moral experiment conducted on a national scale. And everyone, every officer, every clerk, every spectator who laughed had been an unwitting participant. 8 hidden cameras had been installed in the courtroom 3 weeks before the trial. Audio, visuals, biometrics, everything recorded, everything analyzed. Every sneer, every contemptuous glance, every burst of laughter had been documented and compared against behavioral prediction models. And every single reaction had matched Marcus's projections. When the news broke, the public response was immediate and brutal. Social media exploded. The hashtag #WeFailed trended worldwide within 2 hours. But nobody tagged Marcus. Nobody mentioned him by handle. Because everyone understood he didn't need the attention, didn't want it. This wasn't about him being seen. It was about society seeing itself. News commentators struggled to find words. CNN opened with, "America's moral gatekeeper has spoken." NBC asked bluntly, "If he's the one on trial, then who is truly being judged?" But the most piercing remark came from a late-night talk show host who said simply, Marcus Hayes wasn't humiliated. He let them humiliate themselves. And now the entire nation must ask, will we treat the truth as a trial or avoid it like a crime? The political fallout was swift. The mayor of the city where the trial took place held an emergency press conference. His voice was rough, his face pale. "I apologize to America," he said. No applause, no response, just the weight of those words hanging in the air like a death sentence for his political career. Corporate sponsors pulled funding from the police department. Banks requested their names be removed from community programs. Investment firms quietly withdrew support. Nobody wanted their brand associated with what people were now calling the real face of America. But perhaps the most devastating consequences happened in the quiet spaces, in living rooms and at dinner tables, in families torn apart by shame. An officer who had laughed in the courtroom came home to find his teenage daughter watching the footage on her phone. She looked up at him with eyes like ice. "How stupid can you be?" she asked. "Do you even know who he is?" Her words cut deeper than any disciplinary order. It was a sentence handed down by his own blood, unappeasable, without the right to defend himself. Another officer's wife packed her bags without saying a word, just left a note on the kitchen table. "I can't be married to someone who laughs at people's pain." The shame spread like a virus through families, through communities, through an entire system that had believed mockery was a right and power was permanent. At the FBI Academy in Quantico, everything changed. A notice appeared on the bulletin board. Starting next week, all cadets are required to review the courtroom footage of Marcus Hayes as foundational material in the course, Law Enforcement Ethics. The young cadets watched the footage in complete silence. Nobody laughed. Nobody pulled out their phones. They just watched a man sit in dignified silence while an entire system revealed its ugliest face. When it ended, an instructor stepped forward. A cadet in the third row raised his hand hesitantly. Why didn't he speak up from the beginning? The instructor's response was simple but devastating. Because your laughter was the one thing he needed to see most clearly. The room went silent, because they all understood. Laughter is the easiest response when we don't understand, don't care, or don't believe someone could be greater than us. But that laughter had become evidence that required no witnesses, no statute of limitations. Marcus Hayes hadn't needed anyone to take his side. He only needed people to reveal their true selves, and they had, without missing a detail. 3 weeks after the trial, something extraordinary happened at FBI headquarters. A young officer, newly assigned, walked through the third-floor hallway on his first day. The area was reserved for executive levels. He was nervous, excited, wearing a brand-new suit and freshly polished shoes. As he passed a large glass door, he stopped. On the door, in faint gold lettering, was an inscription. Marcus Hayes, Director, Federal Bureau of Investigation. He stared at it for a long moment. All the stories he'd heard, all the rumors, all the news pieces about people who had once mentioned this name with disdain and then fell silent. And now that name stood here at the heart of American power as if there had never been a trial, as if all the previous upheaval had been a collective dream. He looked into the glass and saw his own reflection, young, tense, uncertain. Behind his reflection, that name remained, still, unmoving, unfaded. He wondered silently, wasn't he once put on trial? But he knew the answer. Marcus Hayes was never on trial. The system was, and it had failed spectacularly. He reached out and touched the glass, not to open it, just to check if it was real. Cold, solid, without a trace. Some doors, he realized, aren't meant to be entered. They're meant to reflect, to make you examine yourself, to ask, what would I have done? Would I have laughed too? He moved on without looking back, without taking a photo, without telling anyone, because that door and that name weren't for show. They were for those silent enough to understand that the greatest stories don't end with applause. They live on in moments unspoken, but unforgettable. Inside his office, the one behind that glass door, Marcus Hayes sat alone. No cameras, no audience, just him and a simple desk lamp. On his desk was a final report. The title read, Project Mirror, Final Assessment. He had written only one conclusion. A system is only just when it can see itself clearly. We placed a mirror in front of America. What it saw was not comfortable, but discomfort is the first step toward change. The experiment is complete. The reflection remains. He closed the folder, turned off the lamp, and walked out into the hallway where the young officer was still standing, still staring at that door. Their eyes met for just a second. Marcus nodded, not a greeting, not an acknowledgement, just a simple gesture that said, "You're part of this now. Don't forget what it means." Then he was gone, down the hallway, into the elevator, back into the shadows where he'd always belonged. Because Marcus Hayes understood something most people never learn. Justice doesn't need proclamation. Power doesn't need performance. Truth doesn't need defense. Sometimes the most devastating weapon is simply being present, being silent, being a mirror that forces everyone else to see who they really are. He didn't destroy the system with violence or anger. He destroyed it with patience, with observation, with the simple act of letting people be themselves and then showing the world exactly what that looked like. The courtroom trial had ended months ago, but the real trial, the one America was still taking, would continue for years, decades, maybe forever, because some mirrors, once held up, can never be put down, and some silences speak louder than 1,000 voices ever could. Marcus Hayes never needed the world's applause. He never sought fame or recognition. He simply did what few people have the courage to do. He held up a mirror to a broken system and forced it to look at itself. His story isn't just about one man's quiet strength. It's about all of us, about how we treat people we think have no power, about what we reveal when we believe nobody's watching, about the prejudices we carry and the systems we uphold without questioning. If this story moved you, if it made you think about how you judge others, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to this channel. Share it with someone who needs to hear this message, because sometimes the most powerful voice is the one that never speaks. Thank you for watching. And remember, justice isn't what you say, it's what you reveal.